April 15th, 1946, London, England. The morning fog rolled through the narrow streets of Islington, where Clara Bennett stood frozen on her doorstep, letter in hand, the colour drained entirely from her face. For 3 years, she had mourned Robert Aldridge. Her fiancé reported missing in action after the Dieppe raid of 1942. She had received the telegram, attended the memorial service, and reluctantly moved forward with her life. Clara was now engaged to marry William Harrington in just 2 weeks, a kind man who had helped rebuild what remained of her heart. Before she opened that envelope with the familiar handwriting, Clara believed she had finally found peace after the war. She could not possibly have imagined that this delivery would shatter everything she thought she knew. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how the chaotic aftermath of the Second World War reunited lovers separated by combat, confronting them with impossible choices, and revealing how the machinery of war could destroy lives long after the firing had stopped. The Dieppe raid of August 19, 1942, had been a tactical disaster for the Allies. Of the 6,098 men who departed, mostly Canadians of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division, only 2,210 returned to England. Among the many casualties and captured was Lieutenant Robert Aldridge, a 28-year-old engineer from Manchester, who had trained in Canada before the war. Colonel James Whittaker, commander of the Royal Engineers Support Unit attached to the raid, recalled the preparations in his post-war memoir. We had 8 Matilda tanks modified with specialized equipment, each operated by crews who understood the critical nature of our mission. Lieutenant Aldridge headed the 3rd vehicle, tasked with demolition operations along the eastern perimeter. His technical expertise made him invaluable, perhaps too valuable to risk in such an operation, but we were all aware of the experimental nature of the raid. The morning of the raid dawned with clear skies, unexpectedly favorable conditions that would ultimately prove disastrous, providing perfect visibility for German defenders. Sergeant Thomas Miller, who served under Aldridge, survived the raid and later provided testimony about what happened on the beach. We hit the shore at 0530 hours. German defensive fire was immediate and overwhelming. The water around us erupted with shells, and machine gun fire swept across the beach. Our tank became stranded after taking a direct hit to the track mechanism. Lieutenant Aldridge ordered us to abandon the vehicle and take cover behind a seawall. The last I saw of him, he was attempting to recover essential demolition documents from the disabled tank. There was an explosion nearby, and when the smoke cleared, the lieutenant was nowhere to be seen. Clara Bennett was 26 years old in 1942, working as a nurse at the Royal London Hospital. She and Robert had met in 1938 at a university dance and became engaged just before war broke out. They had postponed their wedding, deciding to wait until after this trouble is over, as Robert had optimistically put it in his last letter to her. Clara's friend and fellow nurse Margaret Wilson described Clara's reaction to the notification of Robert's presumed death. She collapsed when the telegram arrived at the hospital. For weeks afterward, she moved through the wards like a ghost, performing her duties with mechanical precision, but without her usual warmth. It was as though something essential had been extinguished within her. The telegram delivered to Clara on September 10th, 1942 read, "Deeply regret to inform you that Lieutenant Robert James Aldridge has been reported missing in action during operations on August 19th. Letter follows." The follow-up letter, signed by Robert's commanding officer, offered little additional information, only that Lieutenant Aldridge demonstrated exemplary courage under fire and that, despite extensive searches, no trace has been found. After 6 months, the classification was changed from missing in action to missing presumed killed in action, and a memorial service was held at Manchester Cathedral. Clara kept a diary during this period, writing on the day of the memorial service. "Today I said goodbye to Robert, though there was no body to bury, no hand to hold one last time. Reverend Thompson spoke of sacrifice and duty, but all I could think about was our cottage in the Lake District that will never be built now. The fishing trips Robert planned, the children we will never have. They gave me his effects, his pocket watch, some letters, and his Royal Engineers cap badge. I placed the watch beside my bed. though I cannot bear to wind it. By 1944, Clara had thrown herself into her work, volunteering for extra shifts during the V-1 flying bomb attacks on London. The hospital records show she worked 23 consecutive days during the height of the bombardment in July, earning a commendation from the hospital director. William Harrington entered Clara's life in October 1944. A 34-year-old architect working on reconstruction planning for post-war London, he had been brought to the hospital after suffering minor injuries when a section of ceiling collapsed during a planning meeting. Clara was assigned as his nurse. William later described their first meeting. She was efficient and kind, but there was a sadness about her that seemed to go beyond the general weariness we all felt after 5 years of war. I found myself looking forward to her visits to change my bandages, and I began timing my medication requests to coincide with her shifts. After his discharge, William returned to the hospital on various pretexts until finally gathering the courage to ask Clara to join him for tea. She declined 3 times before eventually accepting in January 1945. Their courtship progressed slowly. Clara was hesitant and William was patient. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, they had developed a comfortable companionship that provided Clara with stability after years of loss and uncertainty. Margaret Wilson noted the change in her friend. She smiled again, not the carefree smile from before the war, but genuine nonetheless. William brought a steadiness to her life that she desperately needed. When he proposed in December, none of us were surprised when she accepted. The wedding was scheduled for May 1st, 1946. Preparations were well underway, with rationing coupons saved for months to secure fabric for Clara's dress, which her mother was sewing. William had secured a small flat in Bloomsbury, near his office, and Clara had given notice at the hospital, planning to take some time before deciding whether to return to nursing. And then, on that foggy April morning, everything changed. The letter Clara received was postmarked from France with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, slightly slanted to the right, with distinctive loops on the capital letters. Inside was a single page that read, "My dearest Clara, I pray this letter finds you well. I cannot begin to imagine what you have endured believing me dead these past years. I myself have only recently learned that I was reported killed. I am alive, though changed by my experiences. I have been in a hospital in Switzerland until 2 months ago. Recovering from injuries and memory loss sustained during the Dieppe operation, I am now in Calais, awaiting transport to England and hope to arrive by the end of April. My deepest desire is to see you again. With all my love, Robert." Clara's neighbour, Mrs. Edith Palmer, found her still standing on the doorstep 20 minutes later, the letter clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Palmer brought Clara inside and made her sweet tea with the family's precious sugar ration, while Clara tried to comprehend the impossible situation before her. Mrs. Palmer recalled, "She kept saying, 'He's alive. Robert's alive,' over and over, as though trying to convince herself. Then she looked at the engagement ring William had given her, a modest silver band with a tiny diamond, and began to sob uncontrollably. The truth of what happened to Robert Aldridge after the Dieppe raid emerged slowly in the days and weeks that followed. After being separated from his unit during the chaotic evacuation, Robert had been captured by German forces. Severely wounded by shrapnel and suffering a head injury, he was initially processed as Johann Meyer, a name found on identification papers in the pocket of a coat that had been placed over him by a German medic. The records from Stalag 8B, where Robert was first interned, indicate a prisoner who matched his description was admitted on August 23, 1942, listed as identity uncertain, possible German civilian caught in crossfire. The head injury had resulted in both physical trauma and memory loss, with Robert unable to recall his name or nationality. Dr. Klaus Hoffmann, a German military physician who treated prisoners at Stalag 8B, wrote in his medical log, "Patient demonstrates confusion and disorientation, consistent with traumatic amnesia. He speaks German with what appears to be a Dutch or possibly Danish accent, suggesting he may be from a border region. When questioned about his identity, he becomes agitated, and experiences severe headaches. For 18 months, Robert remained in this state of uncertainty, working in the camp's infirmary due to his apparent medical knowledge, which had survived his amnesia. His fluent German, which he had learned during pre-war engineering studies in Dresden, reinforced the assumption that he was a German civilian. Captain Frederick Norton, a British medical officer also interned at Stalag 8B, encountered Robert in early 1944. In his debriefing after liberation, Norton stated, "There was something distinctly British about the way he carried himself, despite speaking perfect German. When I managed to speak with him alone, I suggested he might actually be British, but he dismissed the idea, saying he had clear memories of growing up in Hamburg. In retrospect, these were likely false memories his mind had constructed to fill the void." The breakthrough came in December 1944, when the camp received a new influx of prisoners captured during the Battle of the Bulge. Among them was Corporal James Davies of the Royal Engineers, who had trained with Robert before the war. Davies provided a sworn statement after the war. "I recognized him immediately, though he was much thinner and had a significant scar along his left temple. I approached him while he was distributing medicine and said, 'Lieutenant Aldridge, it's Davies from training at Chatham.' He stared at me blankly, then walked away. The next day I tried again, showing him a photograph I kept of our training group. He studied it for a long time, focusing on his own image. 'That's me,' he finally said, sounding confused. 'But how can that be me?' Over the following weeks, Davies worked carefully to help Robert recover his true identity, sharing stories of their training days and details about England that gradually began to resonate. Robert's memory returned in fragments. First, technical information about engineering, then personal memories, including his relationship with Clara. By February 1945, Robert had recovered enough of his identity to reveal himself to the German camp authorities as a British officer. This revelation came at a fortunate time, as the advancing Soviet forces were approaching from the east, and the camp was being evacuated. During the chaotic evacuation, Robert and Davies, along with several other prisoners, managed to escape. They made their way west, avoiding both German patrols and Soviet forces, eventually reaching American lines in March. Robert's medical records from the United States Army Field Hospital, where he was initially treated, note patient suffering from malnourishment, frostbite to extremities, and ongoing neurological issues, including memory gaps and severe migraines. Patient was previously held as POW under incorrect identity due to amnesia. Recommendation: transfer to specialized facility for continued treatment. Due to the extensive nature of his injuries and the complex psychological trauma, Robert was transferred to a Swiss medical facility specializing in neurological rehabilitation. Communication breakdowns in the chaotic post-war period meant that the British authorities were not properly notified of his recovery and status. Dr. Helena Bergman, the Swiss neurologist who oversaw Robert's treatment, described his case in a medical journal published in 1947. The patient presented one of the most remarkable cases of identity recovery I have encountered. The amnesia was partially self-protective, a response to the trauma of combat and capture. As his memory returned, he experienced significant psychological distress, particularly regarding the lost years, and concern for his fiancée in England. Physically, he required multiple surgeries to remove remaining shrapnel and repair damage to his left leg. It was not until February 1946 that Robert was well enough to leave the Swiss facility. By then, he had learned through Red Cross inquiries that he had been officially listed as killed in action. His first action was to write to Clara, sending the letter that arrived on that fateful April morning. Clara's immediate response to the letter was overwhelming joy mixed with disbelief. She telephoned William at his office, asking him to come to her home immediately without explanation. When he arrived, she wordlessly handed him the letter. William's colleague, Arthur Thompson, later recounted William's abrupt departure from an important planning meeting. He received a telephone call that clearly upset him. He turned quite pale, made his excuses, and left immediately. The next day, when he returned to the office, he was a changed man, distracted, subdued, and with a resignation in his eyes that was painful to see. Upon reading the letter, William's first words, according to Clara's diary, were, "You must go to him, of course." But the reality of the situation was far more complex than this initial noble reaction suggested. For Clara, the revelation that Robert was alive reopened wounds she had spent years trying to heal. Her diary entry from that evening reads, "How is it possible to feel such joy and such anguish simultaneously? Robert lives. The miracle I stopped praying for years ago has happened. Yet there is William, dear, steady William, who pieced me back together when I was shattered. I love him. I do. But Robert was my first love, my truest love. Or was he? The Clara who loved Robert died a little with him on that beach. I'm not the same woman who said goodbye to him 4 years ago. And Robert, what horrors has he endured? Is he still the same man I loved?" William insisted that Clara should meet Robert when he arrived in England, suggesting that she needed closure, regardless of her decision. "William displays such dignity," Clara wrote. "He says he wants only my happiness, but I see the fear in his eyes that I will choose Robert. How can I possibly make this choice without destroying someone I love?" News of Robert's miraculous return spread quickly through Clara's social circle. Her parents, who had mourned with her, were overjoyed but concerned about the complicated situation. Her father, George Bennett, a methodical accountant, attempted to approach the situation logically. "Father suggested making a list of pros and cons for each man, as though I were deciding between 2 houses to purchase," Clara wrote in her diary. Mother scolded him for reducing such an emotional matter to columns in a ledger. But perhaps there is wisdom in trying to see things clearly, without the fog of emotion. The truth is, I made vows in my heart to Robert. But I have made promises to William as well. Either way, I break faith with someone. As the days passed, Clara's anxiety increased. She took leave from the hospital, unable to concentrate on her duties. William maintained his composure in her presence, but confided in his friend Arthur that he was preparing for the worst while hoping against hope. Margaret visited Clara daily, bringing food and offering support. "She's torn apart by this," Margaret told her husband. "One moment she's ecstatic that Robert has survived, the next she's consumed with guilt over William. She shows me photographs of both men, asking impossible questions. Who do you think needs me more? Who did I love first? Who do I love now?" On April 27, 1946, Clara received a telegram from Robert. "Arriving Dover tomorrow, stop meeting with military officials. London Monday, stop. Could see you Tuesday if agreeable, stop. Send reply. Great Western Hotel, stop Robert." Clara's reply was simple. "Will meet you Tuesday 10 morning, my parents' home, Islington, stop Clara." The weekend before the meeting was agonizing for all involved. William insisted that Clara meet Robert alone, saying, "This is between you and him. I will accept whatever you decide." His quiet dignity only made Clara's decision more difficult. Clara's mother prepared the house meticulously for Robert's visit, cleaning until every surface shone, using precious sugar rations to bake a cake. "Mother moves through these preparations like she's arranging a celebration," Clara wrote. "While I feel as though I'm preparing for an execution, but whose, I cannot say." On Monday evening, William came to see Clara. Their conversation, as she recorded it, was brief but profound. William asked, "Do you know what you will do?" Clara replied, "How can I? I have not seen him yet. I do not even know who he is now, or who I am when I am with him." William nodded and said, "I think you do know, Clara. I think you have always known, from the moment you received his letter, and it is all right." Clara protested, "It is not all right. Nothing about this is all right." William took her hand then and said the words Clara would remember for the rest of her life. "Love is not a debt to be repaid or an obligation to be fulfilled. It is a choice we make each day. Whatever choice you make tomorrow, make it freely. That is all I ask." Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine, the first truly warm day of the year. Clara dressed carefully in a blue dress that Robert had once admired, then changed her mind and put on a simple grey suit that William had helped her purchase with clothing coupons. Then she changed again, into a floral dress that neither man had seen before. At precisely 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Clara's mother answered it, exclaiming with joy at the sight of the man they had believed dead for almost 4 years. Clara remained in the sitting room, paralyzed with anxiety, listening to the murmur of voices in the hallway. And then Robert was there, standing in the doorway. He was thinner, with streaks of grey in his dark hair, despite being only 32. A scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline, and he walked with a slight limp. But his eyes, the deep brown eyes that had once looked at Clara with such love, were the same. "Clara," he said, his voice catching. Just that, her name, as though it contained within it every emotion too complex to express. Clara could not speak. The room seemed to tilt around her as past and present collided. This was Robert, her Robert, risen from the dead. And yet, he was also a stranger, marked by experiences she could not imagine. Robert took a hesitant step forward. "They told me you might be married by now," he said. "Are you?" Clara found her voice at last. "No, not yet. But I am engaged. The wedding was, to be next week." Robert nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "I see." He remained standing, as though uncertain of his welcome. "May I sit down?" Clara gestured to the armchair opposite hers, and Robert lowered himself carefully into it, his left leg extended stiffly before him. Clara's mother appeared with tea and the precious cake, then tactfully withdrew, closing the door behind her. For a long moment, they sat in silence, studying each other across the coffee table that now seemed as wide as the English Channel that had separated them for years. Robert spoke first. "I should have written more clearly in my letter. I did not come back to disrupt your life, Clara. When I learned I had been reported killed, my only thought was that you should know I was alive. I did not consider—" He broke off, looking down at his hands. "I did not allow myself to hope that things might be as they were before." Clara's voice was barely audible. "How could they be? We are different people now, Robert. The war has changed us both." Robert nodded. "Yes, I am not the man who left you. That man died on the beach at Dieppe in many ways." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph. "This kept me alive when my memories returned, the thought of seeing you again. But I understand if that is impossible now." Clara looked at the photograph, a picture of herself from 1940, laughing by the Thames. She remembered the day it was taken, how Robert had insisted on using a precious frame of film to capture her smile. "Tell me what happened to you," she said quietly. And so Robert told her everything, the raid, his capture, the years of living as someone else, and the slow, painful return of his memory. He spoke without self-pity, relating the horrors of the camp and his confusion with the detachment of someone describing events that had happened to another person. "The strangest part," he said, "was when I began to remember you. It was like discovering a room in my mind that had been locked away. Suddenly there you were, your voice, your laugh, the way you would brush your hair from your eyes when you were concentrating. Those memories felt more real to me than the life I was living." As he spoke, Clara watched his hands, the hands that had once held hers with such tenderness, now marked with scars and slightly trembling. She felt a deep ache in her chest, a complex mixture of love, pity, and grief. When Robert finished his account, Clara knew it was her turn to speak. She told him about the telegram, the memorial service, the long, dark months of grieving. She told him about the bombing of London, her work at the hospital, and eventually about William. "He saved me in many ways," she said, her voice stronger now. After I thought you were gone, I did not believe I would ever feel anything again. William was patient. He never pushed. He simply was there." Robert listened intently, his expression revealing nothing. When Clara finished, he asked, "Do you love him?" Clara did not hesitate. "Yes, not as I loved you. That was the love of a younger woman, untested by loss. What I feel for William is quieter but no less real." Robert nodded slowly. "And me? What do you feel for me now?" Clara looked at the man before her, at once so familiar and so strange. "I do not know," she admitted. "When I received your letter, my first feeling was joy so intense it nearly knocked me down. But now, sitting here with you, I realize that I am mourning again, mourning the Robert I knew even as I rejoice that you are alive. They talked for hours, moving gradually from the stiff formality of strangers to something approaching their old ease with one another. Clara's parents brought lunch, then discreetly withdrew again. Outside, the spring day bloomed, with sunshine streaming through the windows and the scent of her mother's hyacinths filling the room. As afternoon faded toward evening, Robert finally asked the question that hung between them. "What will you do, Clara?" Clara looked down at her hands, at the silver engagement ring William had placed there. "I need time," she said finally. "This morning, I thought I would know as soon as I saw you, but it is not so simple." Robert reached across the table then, not quite touching her. "I have a proposal," he said. "Not a marriage proposal, not yet. I will be in London for at least 2 weeks, meeting with military officials about my status and back pay. Give yourself those 2 weeks, postpone your wedding, spend time with both William and me, then decide." Clara considered this. "It seems unfair to William." "Perhaps," Robert acknowledged. "But is it not more unfair to marry him while this question remains unresolved between us?" That evening, Clara met William at their favorite tea shop, a small establishment that had somehow survived the bombing intact. His face as she approached told her he had already guessed the outcome of her meeting with Robert. "He is alive," William said simply, "truly alive and still the man you loved." Clara reached across the table for his hand. "He is alive, yes, but changed, as am I, as are you. None of us are the people we were before the war." William's voice was steady, though his hand trembled slightly in hers. "What do you want to do?" Clara took a deep breath. "Robert has suggested I take 2 weeks to decide, to spend time with both of you, to be certain." William was quiet for a long moment, stirring his tea absently. Then he looked up, his eyes clear and direct. "If you need time, then take it. I would rather lose you knowing you had made the right choice than keep you through obligation or uncertainty." Clara felt tears threatening. "You are a good man, William Harrington." William's smile was sad but genuine. "Not particularly. Just a man who loves you enough to want your happiness, even if it costs me my own." The next 2 weeks were the strangest of Clara's life. The wedding was postponed, with William making the necessary arrangements and bearing the brunt of curious questions from friends and family. Clara divided her time between the 2 men, seeing Robert during the days and William in the evenings. With Robert, she visited their old haunts, the British Museum where they had spent rainy Sundays before the war, the park where he had proposed, the little bookshop where they had first discovered their shared love of poetry. They talked endlessly, relearning each other, discovering the ways they had changed and the core elements that remained the same. Robert told her more about his time in the camp and the hospital, revealing vulnerabilities he would never have acknowledged before the war. "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness," he said as they walked along the Thames. "Now I know it means continuing despite weakness, despite fear." With William, Clara maintained their comfortable routine, dinner at his flat or hers, discussions of books they had read, plans for the future that now hung in suspension. William never pressed her for a decision or spoke ill of Robert. His quiet dignity only made her choice more difficult. "I met him today," William said one evening, surprising Clara. "Robert, he came to my office." Clara set down her teacup with a clatter. "What? Why?" William's expression was thoughtful. "He wanted to meet the man you might marry. He said he needed to know you would be cared for properly if you chose me." "And?" Clara asked, her heart pounding. "He is a good man," William said simply. "I cannot hate him much as I might wish to." As the days passed, Clara's diary entries revealed her growing certainty, though the path ahead remained painful. "I know now what I must do," she wrote on May 12th. "Knowing does not make the doing any easier. Someone will be hurt, deeply hurt. I can only hope that time will eventually heal the wound I'm about to inflict." On May 15th, exactly 2 weeks after her first meeting with Robert, Clara asked both men to meet her at her parents' home. They arrived punctually. Robert first, then William 10 minutes later, as though they had coordinated to give each other space. Clara's parents made themselves scarce, retreating to a neighbor's house after setting out tea and sandwiches that no one would touch. The three sat in the sitting room, an awkward triangle of tension and unspoken emotions. Clara had prepared what she wanted to say, rehearsing it repeatedly, but now that the moment had arrived, the carefully planned words deserted her. She looked from Robert to William and back again, these two good men who loved her in their different ways. "I have made my decision," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Before I tell you what it is, I want you both to know that this has been the most difficult choice of my life. There is no perfect answer, no path forward that does not cause pain." Robert sat perfectly still, his face composed, but his eyes revealing his anxiety. William nodded encouragingly, though his knuckles were white where his hands gripped the arms of his chair. Clara continued, "The war took so much from all of us. It took years we cannot recover, experiences we should have shared, the people we might have become in peacetime. From you, Robert, it took your memory, your health, and very nearly your life. From you, William, it took the career you were building and the security you had worked so hard to achieve." She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. "And from me, it took certainty. Before the war, I knew exactly what my life would be. I would marry Robert, have children, perhaps continue nursing part-time. The path was clear. Then came the telegram, and that path vanished. I had to find a new way forward, and William, you helped me do that." Clara looked directly at Robert now. "When your letter arrived, I thought the choice would be simple. You were my first love, the man I had grieved for years. Your return was the miracle I had stopped allowing myself to pray for." Robert's expression softened, a flicker of hope crossing his features. Clara turned to William. "But these past 2 weeks have shown me that love is not just about history or promises made. It is about who we are now, the people the war has shaped us into." She took a deep breath. "Robert, I will always love the young woman and man we were before the war, but that woman exists now only in memory. The Clara who stands before you today, the Clara who worked through air raids, who held the hands of dying soldiers, who rebuilt her life from the ashes of grief. She is a different person, and she loves William." The room was absolutely silent. Robert closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the impact of her words. When he opened them again, there was pain there, but also a glimmer of understanding. Clara continued, her voice gentle. "You are a remarkable man, Robert Aldridge. Your survival, your recovery, they are nothing short of miraculous. Some woman will be fortunate to build a life with you, but that woman cannot be me. The war that separated us also set us on different paths. To try to go back would be to deny who we have become." Robert nodded slowly. "I suspected this might be your decision," he said quietly. "Watching you with William, there is an ease between you, a rhythm that speaks of deep compatibility." He managed a small, sad smile. "The Robert who left for Dieppe would have fought this decision, would have tried to persuade you otherwise. But I am not that man anymore." William had remained silent, his expression unreadable. Now he looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. Clara turned to him fully. "William, if you still want me after all this, I would be honored to be your wife." The tension in William's shoulders released, and he exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for 2 weeks. "Of course I still want you," he said simply. "I have never stopped." Robert stood then, somewhat stiffly due to his injured leg. "I should go," he said, his dignity intact despite the pain evident in his eyes. Clara rose as well. "Robert, He shook his head. "No explanations needed. You have made your choice with clarity and honesty. That is all anyone could ask." He turned to William, extending his hand. "Take care of her." William stood and grasped Robert's hand firmly. "I will. You have my word." After Robert had gone, William and Clara sat together in silence, the magnitude of what had just occurred settling around them. "Are you certain?" William asked finally. "Completely certain." Clara nodded. "I am. Seeing Robert again helped me understand that. What we had was precious, but it belongs to the past. You are my present and my future, William. if you can forgive the uncertainty of these past weeks. William's answer was to draw her close, holding her with the gentle strength that had been her anchor through the darkest days. They were married 2 weeks later, in a quiet ceremony attended by close friends and family. Robert had left London by then, accepting a position with a reconstruction project in France. He sent a telegram on their wedding day. "Wishing you both every happiness. The better man won. Take care of each other." The story of Clara, William and Robert became part of family lore, passed down through generations as an example of how the war had reshaped countless lives in ways both tragic and redemptive. Clara and William enjoyed 47 years of marriage, raising 3 children, and later delighting in 7 grandchildren. William's architectural firm played a significant role in rebuilding post-war London, while Clara eventually returned to nursing, specializing in rehabilitative care for war veterans. Robert never returned to England permanently, but he and Clara maintained a respectful correspondence over the years. He found success as an engineer in France's reconstruction efforts, eventually marrying a French widow named Jeanne in 1950. Their Christmas cards showed a growing family and a life rebuilt from the ruins of war. In her memoir, published in 1982 when she was 66 years old, Clara reflected on that pivotal time. "People often ask if I regret my choice or if I wonder about the life I might have had with Robert. The truth is simpler and more complex than they expect. The war did not just take Robert from me temporarily. It permanently changed who we both were. The miracle was not that he returned, but that all 3 of us found the courage to acknowledge that reality and move forward with honesty." The story of these 3 individuals, Clara, Robert, and William, reflects the broader experience of their generation. The Second World War did not end when the fighting stopped. For millions, its echoes continued to shape lives, relationships, and choices for decades to come. The true cost of the conflict cannot be measured only in casualties and destruction, but also in the invisible alterations to countless human hearts and minds. Historian Dr. Eleanor Richards, in her 2010 analysis of post-war British society, wrote, "The Bennett-Aldridge-Harrington case exemplifies how the war continued to exact its price long after 1945. Military records indicate over 8,000 British personnel initially reported killed in action were later found alive, most in prisoner of war camps, some suffering from trauma-induced amnesia like Aldridge. Each revelation rippled through families and communities who had already processed their grief and moved forward. These returnings represent a largely unstudied aspect of post-war adjustment. For Clara, William, and Robert, the war's final legacy was not tragedy, but a hard-won wisdom. The understanding that sometimes the most courageous act is not to reclaim what was lost, but to recognize when it is time to let go and build something new from the changed materials of one's life. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.